In the One Punch Man universe, robots, cyborgs, and other mechanical beings have already been shown to have a very prominent role in the story. Of course, we have Genos, everybody's favorite cybernetic punching bag, but remember, he's also a main character and an S-Class hero. Another S-Class hero is Drive Knight, who is apparently an android, cyborg, maybe just a guy wearing like an Iron Man suit. I don't really know, but he's pretty badass and can transform into a cybernetic horse, so that's something. Then, of course, we have the mysterious Metal Knight, the Class S hero. His real name is Boyfoy, and he is the one that actually creates all these different kinds of technological advancements for the Hero Association. He's the one that builds their structures and their headquarters to make them resistant to enemies' attacks. He has a fucking AT-AT walker that can repair the entire, like, city and restructure it out of just a few days. He creates a bunch of robotic drones and sentries to go and fulfill his hero duties. But he himself, Boyfoy, remember, is just an ordinary scientist, living in this secluded area, probably a very heavily reinforced bunker, I would imagine, that's keeping tabs on all this stuff through computer monitors, not having any abilities to fight himself. There's a lot of mystery revolving around Metal Knight, and that's what we're going to go into here. See, this whole mystery comes about with this mysterious shadow organization called the Organization. Now, the Organization hasn't really been brought up a lot in One Punch Man. It's only been dropped maybe a few times, and I hope we'll get into that maybe as like the next main arc. It certainly makes sense because Boyfoy isn't particularly fond of what Saitama is doing. See, essentially, Saitama, he wrecks a lot of his shit. Especially when he rebuilds the entire Hero Association HQ, and, there are people starting to live there, and they're like, oh, don't worry, you can come to the Hero Association, you can live here, the heroes are right here, and we have all this reinforced, protection against the monsters, they're created by Metal Knight, who's this brilliant scientist, you can live here, no problem. And then Saitama, who's also living there, forgot his keys one day, and ended up having to fight against all the freaking robotic sentries, and just wipe them all out, and then the Hero Association is admittedly a little concerned here that, hey, Metal Knight, you said that these robotic drones were, providing, levels of safety to the people living here, but this one, A-class hero was able to wipe them out in just literally a matter of minutes. So yeah, right now, Metal Knight's not that fond of Saitama, so I think we're gonna move into a lot more prominent stuff with him. But as for the organization itself, it was actually mentioned rather early on in the One Punch Man story, around the same time that Sonic was introduced, everybody's favorite redundantly named ninja. The debut of Sonic involved him taking out the Hammerhead group. So Hammerhead had his followers together, and Hammerhead himself kind of a few curly short of a Three Stooges. He stole these power suits, which are basically kind of like the Iron Man suits, like these big, heavy robotic suits that amplified the user's strength like hundreds fold, like they can crush, buildings and shit and lift up trees and just hurl them and stuff. And Sonic was, sent out to go eliminate them, of which he does, killing pretty much everybody except for Hammerhead himself. Hammerhead eventually manages to escape Sonic and Saitama, and he's confronted by these two mysterious robotic beings. They don't say much, but they refer to them as part of the Organization, and they state that they're actually allowing Hammerhead to have stolen these power suits to kind of test their potential, and so that's why they kept him around. He managed to escape from these guys too, so they didn't outright kill him. Even so, I'm not really sure if they have any other plans for him. Not really interested if Hammerhead shows back up in the story, but yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Now, of course, there's no direct references in the story so far that the Organization is connected to Metal Knight or any of the other robotic experts or, cyborgs in the story. In fact, there's a lot of talk about Dr. Kuseno, the doctor that is responsible for converting Genos into a cyborg and for fixing up all of his injuries. They're saying that actually he might be part of the Organization. I actually have a theory revolving around this, and this is how it goes. Kuseno and Metal Knight were actually at one point in their lives part of this organization of these robots. And the goal of this organization, at least the goal that I could see this going about and making a pretty good, storytelling, a good solid arc in One Punch Man, is to build robotic soldiers to, take over the world. And the reason I think that is because so far we have Metal Knight who's constructing all these crazy, sentries and drones to the point where he's capable of doing, insane things. He was able to rebuild from scratch an entirely new hero association that was the size of, a city in only, a span of, a few days, right? So you look at that and you're like, oh, okay, well, he could be using his intelligence to create robots for the betterment of mankind, but then you're walking a fine line there. You're walking a line that involves a lot of, holy shit, I could totally defect and, become a supervillain like that It would be so fucking easy to do that. And from what we've seen so far, Boyfoy's morals aren't, like, really that great. He doesn't really care about the public so much as he really just cares about getting a sample of monsters and stuff. I mean, there was a moment when he encountered Senior Centipede. You know, not him exactly, it was his battle drone that he sent, and he was talking to the other heroes like, you should evacuate out of here, you know, but he didn't really, he was more concerned about getting a sample from Senior Centipede's armor to use it and to advance his own, you know, technologies. He's not that interested in, you know, like making sure that people are safe or whatever like that. That being the case there. And since the situation with Boyfoy and the Hero Association isn't that great right now because they're kind of distrusting his competence in creating quality, you know, robots that can actually defend it, considering what Saitama did, you know, that might put, you know, Boyfoy a little bit of odds with the organization. I mean, with the Hero Association, to be like, screw you, I don't need this. So, to break it down, I think the organization is essentially what Metal Knight is truly a part of. He has more loyalties to that than he does to the actual Hero Association. And that's why he doesn't really show up a lot to the meetings. Like, you have an S-class meeting where pretty much everybody shows up except for Blast, and who's the other one? Metal Knight. And this is supposed to be like an S-class meeting about the fate of the world, and he still doesn't show up. Because he's more busy focusing on his other, you know, tasks as running this organization and trying to build up his robotic army. I think that's what he's more interested in. Something else that we find out in the webcomic is that another S-class hero, S-class rank 5, Child Emperor, is the former assistant to Boyfoy. Now, he says former like he was no longer part of it, so he left for some reason, and we don't exactly know why. You know, Child Emperor has not actually ever stated this, and during the events of the arc with Garo, when they were raiding the Monster Association, basically when all hope was lost, and they didn't really know where else to go, Child Emperor sent a message to Boyfoy, and he was basically just like, please come and help us, your former assistant, Child Emperor, and he sends the message. But he's not very confident that he'll show up. It's more of just like, well, I'll send him a message, and maybe he'll help us, but he probably will just ignore it, but he still, so it's not like Child Emperor felt like, oh, you're evil, and so I'm gonna leave you, you know, because I think it would have been more apparent than that. It would have been like a little bit more animosity toward him than that, but there certainly is a connection there, and I'm not saying Child Emperor's part of this organization or anything like that, but he certainly does have connections to Boyfoy in some way, so that would be an interesting confrontation there. Something else is Drive Knight. Now, Drive Knight, we don't really know what his deal is. If he's straight up a robot, or like he's a cyborg too, or like I said, he could just be a normal human with the armor. His way of fighting, as we found out rather recently in the manga, is his tactical transformation. So he has his own armor, but then he has like this big box that he has that allows him to transform, like the box itself can merge with him to either change his actual physical form like that of a centaur, get it Drive Knight, like all of his techniques are very knightly, so he can have a horse to ride upon, and creates a lance or a sword called Geen or Silver that he can use to cut down fucking monsters and shit. So yeah, his morals seem to be in the right place, taking out monsters and all that stuff. And the biggest red flag, well, not really a red flag, but the biggest moment with him about the organization is at the end of the fight with the aliens, or when the alien fight with Boros and everything was quieting down. Drive Knight, well, he first goes up to Child Emperor, and he's like, it seems like I'm not needed here, I'm gonna get going. And then Child Emperor is, yeah, that's okay, that's cool, you can get going. That makes me think that Child Emperor actually had a hand in creating Drive Knight. You know, because Drive Knight actually went over to Child Emperor and is like, you know, I think I'm gonna get going, like telling, like, why would he even bother telling him? Just fucking leave, you know? So I feel like that's the thing. Like, you know, Child Emperor created Drive Knight, or at least the armor for Drive Knight, or the tactical transformation thing, and that's where that came from. But before he left, Drive Knight went over to Genos and was like, Metal Knight is your enemy, remember that. And then he left. He didn't actually explain to him. He just like, I'm not gonna explain it, just stay away from him for now. So I think that was pretty much explaining that, you know, Genos' whole goal is to try to find the cyborg that wrecked his town, and I feel like if that's the situation with Boyfoy creating, like, a robot army of, like, Terminators, you know, he was responsible for creating this cyborg that wrecked his town, and he has, like, maybe a bunch of other cyborgs. It could have been, like, you know, it could have been a creation that he did that went out of control. It went out of control and wreaked havoc, and he didn't intend for it to do that. It could have been, hey, here's another idea. It could be Drive Knight himself. It could have been like an earlier version of Drive Knight. If Drive Knight truly is like an android, like a pure robot, which would make sense given his tactical transformations actually reshaping his body in a sense. It would make sense that he was a full robot rather than rather than like partly organic. You know what I mean? But then again, Genos is pretty much 99% robot too. It's just that his brain and his spinal cord still remains as human. That's like the only thing that's still there. It could be the same thing with Drive Knight. And maybe that's how Drive Knight knew about it. Like, oh yeah, at one point when I was being created, I went crazy and ransacked a town, and then he got me under control, but I still remember it, and Metal Knight was the one, or Metal Knight and Shadow Emperor the one that created me, so just stay away from them, essentially there. And so how does it all go back to Dr. Kuseno? Everyone seems to think Dr. Kuseno is evil. Everyone thinks that, like, the person that was responsible for, saving Genos' life, or at least from what we know about. And I could see where this is coming from. I'm not completely oblivious to this. You have a guy like Dr. Kuseno who is a brilliant scientist that can create, like, cybernetic organisms, It would be really easy for him to, like, take Genos and, like, implant false memories into him and make him think that Dr. Kuseno, oh yeah, I'm the good guy, I saved you, but in reality, he was the one responsible for it. There's a reason why, like, that's the reason that Genos has not found this cyborg yet, because Dr. Kuseno is behind it, and he's going to make sure that he doesn't. But, and then also, of course, every single time that Dr. Kuseno fits him with a device, it's always like, oh yes, with these new parts from Dr. Kuseno, I shall defeat the monster. Even when Genos wins, he loses. You know what I mean? But it's still, like, it's not like I think he's intentionally trying to sabotage him, because all the weapons that he gets do upgrade his stats a little bit, especially that adhesive thing that he used. He was planning on using it against Sonic, and the parts he used in his arms mode and shit. It's obviously upgrading his weaponry. It's just the level of enemies that people have to deal with in One Punch Man is just, like, on a whole other level. So it's like, yeah, Genos can hold his own against a demon, but then, like, fucking Goketsu shows up, and it's like, I got nothing against this, and it just stampedes on him. Yeah, and something else with Dr. Kuseno, the last time we saw him, I think, is when he was interested in seeing Saitama. He's like, maybe you can bring Saitama over here to my laboratory, and I could do some tests on him or something. So, but I don't really think that Kuseno is a bad guy. I don't think he is. I think he does have connections with Boyfoy, and maybe after finding out what Boyfoy was trying to do with, like, the robot army, that is the organization, he left, and he built Genos as kind of a way to fight against it, and, that's the way it is. But, Kuseno is limited. Like, he doesn't have as much support as Boyfoy does. He only has, like, his own laboratory and, like, one cyborg that constantly gets fucking ripped to shreds, and he has to constantly keep repairing, So, yeah, I think that's more of the case there. Boyfoy being the part of this shadow organization, called the Organization, trying to raise, like, a robot army to eventually take over the world, but he needs, like, the funding from the Hero Association to do all of this, and to test out his new robots. That's the perfect way for him to test his equipment, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna join up with this Hero Association, create robots and drones and all these sentry things to fight these monsters, and no one will think it's suspicious because I'm part of the Hero Association, so everyone will think I'm just fighting the monsters for the good of the society and shit. But in reality, it's like a big test run. Like, okay, after he figures out, like, I've created the perfect army of robots that can stand with not just the villains, but also the heroes, because you have the other heroes to contend with. If he can get stats on all these heroes, that's when he's going to make his move. Like, alright, I have these robots that can now counter heroes and villains alike. It's now time for me to fucking Boyfoy to rule the world, because I have all these fucking robots and AT-AT walkers at my disposal and shit. I think that's the route we're going with it, and I think that would be a very interesting plot here. And then you'd have Child Emperor trying to fight against him, because it's like, that's like he's his former master or something, and I think Drive Knight would go along with Child Emperor and, like, Genos too, and you have this confrontation against Boyfoy and all that shit. I think that would be a cool arc, a pretty solid arc after where we're going from right now. It'd be pretty neat. any way to see that and get all this stuff resolved. But anyway, that's my theory on Boy Foy, Metal Knight, the organization, how Drive Knight fits in with that, how Child Emperor fits in with that, and then poor Genos, who is pretty much left in the dark about everything. But Genos' thing is just, I just want to find that robot, that cyborg that wrecked my town and killed my family, and kill it. And then I guess by extension finding who created it as well, and then just learning from Saitama along the way, trying to get into the upper echelon of the S rank. So that might be a thing too, like when Genos starts getting into the higher, like the top 10 of the S rank, then he starts learning some shit. I don't know. It's gonna be a messed up thing, but probably a lot of bloodshed and a lot of awesome robot wars. I could deal with a robot war in One Punch Man. I think that could fit pretty well. Yeah, that could be pretty solid. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed the video. This will be Tekking101 signing out. Later, everybody.